Hello and welcome. I really appreciate you being here. For those in the US who are attending live, this is in the morning of July 5th, meaning that all those fireworks last night and staying up late happened, and yet here you are today. So thank you for that. Hey, let me give you a little bit of setup. If you are not someone who's attended a lot of these presentations in the past, or maybe you're new to Bright Talk entirely, there's a couple things I'd want you to know. The first is that there's a lot of good stuff in the attachments. Just look right underneath the slide. You'll see a tab there called Attachments. One of the first things that you want to grab there might be the list of, or the PDF of the slides that I'll be using. For those who are note takers, feel free to take those and use those. In fact, today's presentation, the slides do have quite a bit of content that will be on screen. So you may find those slides are helpful long term. There's some other good stuff in the attachments too, some bonus resources and some next steps that you might choose to take. So mind that for all it's worth. I have a favor to ask. Whether you're attending live or whether you're looking at this on demand, please post for me a review. I appreciate those. They help me to know what you like or what you'd like to see done differently. And I really use that information and enjoy so much the community that we've established here. So thank you for your input. It always means a lot to me. I'm Deb, and I have been presenting here on Bright Talk and the People First Potential channel for about 6.5 years now. So we have a big body, an archive here of lots of other content that you might find is useful. You can access that anytime you like, but you can also access me anytime you like. You see my email address on screen now, and in the attachments tab, I've given you a way to connect with me on LinkedIn. I just would love to be able to help you take the next steps. If you have questions, I encourage you to reach out to me and to let me know. Also up there on screen, note the URL, peoplefirstpotential.com. That's our other learning platform. This one is one-directional presentations, people who want to get something on demand, who want to be able to just listen and learn. Right? This is a great channel for you. But we also have an interactive learning channel. That's People First Leadership Academy, peoplefirstpotential.com. And we have about 50 interactive workshops and immersion experiences, coaching and assessment options. For those of you who are in HR, we've got 10 courses there that are available for SHRM recertification credits. So there's a whole lot more than what you see right here. And I just wanted you to know that. All right, now we are talking today about critical competencies for facilitators. Let me give you just a little bit of setup here. I'll be talking about facilitation skills and competencies that you can use if you are a trainer, if you're someone who conducts meetings, if you are facilitating any sort of dialogue. These are core competencies that are useful for all those types of settings. Now, there is a companion course that's 10 Fixes for Miserable Meetings, and that one is specifically related to standard business meetings, and it has content for facilitators, organizers, and even participants in those kinds of meetings. But this presentation, this one is more focused on the essentials of facilitating in any setting and on the principles and qualities that can help you be more effective when you're facilitating meetings or training workshops. So what I'm describing here, this is universal. What I'm offering you here is applicable in all those different settings anytime that you're a facilitator. You might see words on screen that say training or learners. Uh, don't let that box you in. Trainer, facilitator, meeting leader, you can group all of that under that same umbrella. Learner, participant, audience, all of those would be the recipients when you are facilitating. So I mean this to be universal. That course, by the way, thank you for the question. Post questions for me anytime, those who are attending live. The course, 10 Fixes for Miserable Meetings, is on People First Leadership Academy, but I did give you a link to it directly there in the attachments. So yeah, if you're here live, I'll watch the questions, I'll respond to them, and you'll probably be helping the folks who come later on demand too, because they may have the very same questions. Well, why do we need to talk about facilitation? I know we do need to because we had a really high enrollment for this course. Uh, we need to talk about getting facilitators trained because there's a cost when we don't have facilitators who are trained. It's a pretty big cost. Unproductive business meetings are said to cost companies about 541 billion, that's billion with a B, in lost productivity and employee time. That's a lot of money. And we've all been there. We've all been in those miserable meetings where someone is droning and we're doing our best to listen, but it's way too hard. Everybody around us is multitasking and it feels like we're admiring the problem, not fixing it. The conversation takes tangents and it's just messy. So we need facilitators who can rein that in and help us to get the value that those meetings ought to be giving to us individually and to businesses overall. When it comes to training, this is the most recent data, 2021. Worldwide, companies spent $130 billion on corporate training. And sadly, only 23% of training programs are shown to measurably improve business performance. So here too, we have a tremendous risk of lots of wasted money and wasted time. So let's go ahead and think about what you can do to assess the meetings. We'll start there. For you to assess the meetings in your own organization, I'll go through this list of 10 or so different chronic conditions that are plaguing meetings everywhere. I want you to know that all of these issues, and a lot more too, can be solved when you have a trained facilitator at the helm of the meeting. But I'm going to cover these, and as I do, eh, go ahead and do some self-evaluation. Whether I'm talking about meetings, typical business meetings, or training sessions, whichever one you're most closely connected to, do some self-assessment here. So meetings and training sessions, common problem. To the people who are attending them, they might feel a bit aimless or disorganized. Even when you've got a solid agenda that says this is what we're talking about, even then, people often report that it feels disorganized, that the trainer went off on some big tangent because of a question that was asked and then missed a huge hunk of what was on the agenda. Any situation like that would fall in this first bullet point. Second one, and this one might surprise you, it's a problem when the person who's facilitating the meeting is also participating in the discussion. So let's say this is a strategic planning meeting. We've got the executive team all in one room and the HR senior leader is the one doing the facilitation because they often get tapped for this sort of thing. Now, here you are trying to, as facilitator, bring all voices into the conversation accurately and in a timely way, capture the big ahas or the big progress that's made up there on the flip chart or the marker board. You're trying to listen and probe for understanding and make sure that everybody's tracking with what's been said. And yet, you are also trying to participate in the discussion to represent the HR function as the strat plan is being developed. It's nearly impossible to do that. I mean, let's face it, you are responsible for the HR function. So you need to represent that. You might have some bias toward it. You've got to advocate. And yet, you're trying to multitask and do all the rest of that facilitation work to bring all the other voices into it equally. And that's really difficult to do. So that's a problem. Now, there are ways to develop as a facilitator and to try to make this happen. But that might be one where you bring somebody else in, somebody in your organization or from outside who is purely there to facilitate. They're a trained facilitator. All right, I'm going to step up the pace here just a little bit. When you've got meetings that are discussion only and action items are barely mentioned, if at all, but the discussion is the only activity that's happening. There's no opportunity for hands-on. There's no opportunity for iterations or anything else. Well, that can be a problem because it shuts down certain folks in the meeting. And we'll talk more about that. Facilitators, as meeting leaders, you may not realize just how much influence you have on the style, the pace, and the tone of the meeting. You're setting the standard and you're bringing people to this in some fashion, and they're responding to you. This is the law of reciprocity. This is what happens when people are receiving what it is you're putting out there. Now, to be trained means that you won't leave people behind because you will manage your style, your pace, and your tone, and you'll flex it to mirror others in the meeting and to engage them. Well, the next one is an obvious one. So many people who conduct meetings have never had even a split second of training in the skills for meeting facilitation. And sadly, that's also true for a lot of trainers. Poof, one day you got named to be a trainer, or in addition to your regular job, you are now doing some training. And without any sort of understanding of adult learning principles or of what it looks like to train well, what you're probably doing, no fault of your own, what you're probably doing is more like information dumping. You are focused on knowledge sharing more than you're focused on knowledge transfer if you don't know what it looks like to have good instructional design, adult learning principles, and the essence of what good training looks like. Okay, so I'm going to just answer Jack. Jack, over on People First Leadership Academy, that training is only live, or there are some on-demand sessions. They're available anytime. But the live ones, they're interactive. We don't record those. But here on Bright Talk, everything is recorded and it's all always available on demand. So thank you for your question. I imagine it is really late in Thailand, so we appreciate you being here. But just know that in Bright Talk, you can always access these sessions on demand. Okay, back to our list. How many have a playbook of meeting protocols? It's a pretty small number. I work with quite a few of our clients to develop that. When you have meeting protocols, it tidies up the meetings. People come in with the same expectations, they come in with the same ground rules, they interact in ways that are more effective, and you won't have so many who are distracted or distracting that take away from the quality of the meeting overall. Now, a meeting facilitator is the keeper of those meeting protocols. So if you are someone who frequently facilitates, or if you're a trainer, you might want to lead the charge in creating that playbook. Um, Simple skill, but you'll know right away. If you're watching meetings, you'll know if you've got a trained facilitator engaged or not. Meetings ought to begin with, here's the desired outcome. This is the overview of what we're covering. Here's how we're going to cover it. Those items are on our agenda. Well, some are for discussion, some are for decision, some are for information only, right? It's all figured out in advance. People know what to expect. That means they know how to engage. And the facilitator is primarily represented in these last two for meetings as well as training. Whether it's the facilitator or someone else who's been appointed to the role, meetings are much better when all voices are in, when all ideas are truly considered, when it's not clock watching that's the most important thing, but people engaging that becomes the most important thing. And at the end of a meeting, or perhaps the end of a particular action item or agenda item, to make sure, right, for someone to facilitate, we all have a common understanding. We all know what our own role will be. We all know what our deadlines are so that we can do something beyond the meeting. All right, so that's just the self-assessment. Now you know the kinds of things that you could be accomplishing if you had trained facilitators. But we've got to talk about why this doesn't happen already, why it doesn't happen easily, and why it requires a little bit of training to be able to get there. And that's because there is some truth to the statement, you can't teach an old dog new tricks. But No offense intended here. For the purposes of our session, please note that I'm quite likely the oldest of any of the old dogs here. And the reason I'm bringing up this adage, it's really relevant. You know, there are challenges in teaching adults anything. Challenges anytime you want adults to hear, receive, and do something with information that you're sharing. But it can be especially challenging to teach something new to someone who has a great deal of experience. And that's because they might not see a need to change it. They don't see a need to change it oftentimes because what they're doing works. At least it works for them, or it works in a certain measure. You're asking people oftentimes to unlearn, to give up something before they move into something new. And this is just the surface. We're scratching the surface of adult learning principles. So I'm going to go ahead and dive deep into this thing called adult learning principles. Before I do that, I'm going to answer Eugene's question. Hello, Eugene. I recognize your name from the Leadership Academy too. It's good to see you here. Eugene is writing in from Cape Town in South Africa. He asks, what advice would you give to a person chairing a meeting for the first time? Should he or she participate in that meeting or only chair the meeting? And it's a great question. For anybody who is leading a meeting, it is difficult to do both, to be a participant and a meeting leader. I understand for practical reasons that has to happen sometimes. If you have a weekly team meeting, for example, it's probably going to happen each time. But I'd like you to consider this alternative for two situations particularly. So, if you have a very deep, involved, serious matter that needs to be discussed, like strategic planning, I would suggest that you bring in another facilitator. When the stakes are high, when there's a great deal that needs to involve all the people who are a part of that team, you ought to give the person who would otherwise be chairing that meeting, you should give them a fair chance at being an equivalent participant. And the other situation where I would encourage you to think about a different scenario is if you've got those recurring meetings, how about you rotate? It's not the same person every time who's chairing the meeting. Instead, everybody gets an opportunity to do that. And this week it's my turn. Next week it's your turn. The week after that, it's going to be Jack. And we're just going to continue to rotate that role so that everybody has an opportunity to fully participate most often and to lead the meeting when that person's turn comes up. For the first timer, my advice is no different. Uh, the feeling of uh, being on stage, being there because it's the first time, that's going to and raise the stakes for them. They're less likely to participate, more likely to focus on leading the meeting, and that means that they'll be giving something up. Okay, now adult learning principles. Adults really are different. Children are spongy. You could teach a child without even trying to. They absorb everything that's around them. They learn from all different kinds of sources. But adults are different. Adults question assumptions. Adults have their own experience. Adults want to evaluate outcomes. They want to offer alternate perspectives. And those who teach are going to be more effective when they allow and even invite some evaluation and allow some participation in creating those alternatives. Adults don't typically like to be taught in absolutes. So, what you see on screen here, these are some things that trained facilitators would take into account. Here again, if you have high stakes meetings, to Kate's point in the questions here, if you have an external facilitator or someone who's highly trained in facilitation, they know that adults need to have some ability to self-direct their own learning. They do that by asking questions. They do that by bringing in their own experiences and being dignified as they do. Adults need time for critical reflection. Now, here's a classic example. An untrained facilitator, whether it's internal or external, an untrained facilitator or trainer might take exception, might feel um, challenged in ways that are unhealthy if they don't understand that adults need opportunities to critically reflect. They would take this as resistance or pushback or somebody trying to be contrary, when in fact that's just part of the learning process for that individual. And so, Kate, the pros and cons of having an external facilitator have everything to do with whether or not you have these competencies inside your own organization. And if you need to involve, say, everybody in the organization, well, an external facilitator is a good option. Or if you've got team building that needs to happen, and putting any one person in that team in the role of the meeting leader or the trainer, when that would cause more divides than unities, that's a good time to think about an external facilitator. So it's not inherently you must have internal, you must have external. It's much more situational. Um, that other course I mentioned, the companion course called 10 Fixes for Miserable Meetings, actually addresses that in a lot more detail too. Feel free to take the class. It's free. The link is there in the attachments. There's also a book on Amazon by the same name, 10 Fixes for Miserable Meetings, for those who want to explore that topic a little more in depth. Okay, adults are also different because they need to learn from their experiences or through new experiences. They already have experience, so we've got to bring that into the conversation if we're going to accelerate learning for adults. And yes, the old dog's new tricks maxim is true. Adults, in some cases, need to relearn how to learn. You can't just dump the information and expect them to go and do something with it, because they have to filter through their experiences and their critical reflection and all the other things that are relevant for adults first. Okay. I'm going to take Amy's question. Amy, I apologize if I don't get right on the mark. Feel free to post a follow up here. Her question is, would it be appropriate, if revealing new information, to allow some time to first reflect and assess, and then turn to a colleague and share your thoughts? So what I'm envisioning, Amy, is that you're thinking about, during a meeting or during a training class, do you share the information, allow some individual reflection, and then have people work in pairs or small breakouts to share their thoughts and process that information? And if I've understood that correctly, the answer is yes. You're teeing up what we're about to talk about. That fits very nicely with something called triplication when it comes to adult learning principles. So hang tight with me, see if I fully cover that for you when I get there. And if not, give me a follow up. Okay, so adult learning. This is all about how adults are different from children, and adults learn differently. They receive information, they process information, they communicate and utilize information differently than people who are younger and don't have experiences already in the bank. What I'm showing you right here, these are called 6 perceptual modalities of learning, and I'm going really old school here because this was some groundbreaking research back in the 1980s. Since then, a lot more has been done, and there are a lot more drill downs and alternative terms and ways of looking at this. But I'm presenting it this way because it's the simplest way that we could look at it, and everything that's come after this isn't different in a way that says this is wrong, just different in a way that builds on what's already here. So let me describe these 6 different primary types or ways that adults learn, receive, process information. As I do this, go back into self-assessment mode. Think about which of these is most true for you. It might be multiple, but which one is most true for you when you are in a time when you're trying to learn something or absorb some new information. The first one is actually the one that is least common among adults, and that is learning by listening. An oral learner really prefers to receive information in a way where they hear it. They might even close their eyes if they're in a training session, for example, because they are trying to block out everything else and purely listen and hear so that they can receive that information, process it well, and learn from it. But there are enough, even though this is the lowest percentage, there are still enough oral learners out there that we do things like this, where I am purely giving you information orally right now as you hear me, that is. It's why audio tapes and audio books are popular because some people really prefer to receive information that way. Podcasts would fill the need as well. The most common, however, is the visual learner. The visual learner is someone who learns by seeing, and because this is the most common way of learning, that's why PowerPoint exploded and still is so popular in sessions like this one. Kate's asking perceptual modalities versus learning styles. That's a very complicated answer, Kate, and it depends on which academic body of work you might be following. But I'm going to give you the very short answer, which is it's pretty much the same thing. So call it learning styles if you'd like. Yes. How do people receive? How do they learn? How do they communicate? How do they perceive and receive and process information? Visual would also include demonstration. Here, let me show you how to do that. So anytime you're watching and you're learning because of what you're looking at, that would be a visual learning style. Print is I learn by reading. I like to look at the entire manual and read all the instructions. I like to read a book or a white paper or something to learn. I process, I learn better when I read. Interactive learners, well, this is what Amy teed up a moment ago, right? So um, we're going to appeal to multiple learning types. She said, first, let's reveal the new information. Maybe that was both oral and visual. Somebody was saying it, somebody was showing it on PowerPoint. And then there was time to reflect. And then she's suggesting that we do something interactive, turn to a colleague and exchange ideas, have some discussion about it. That meets the needs of our interactive learners. Here's my type. I am so much a tactile learner. So much a tactile learner. This is somebody who takes a lot of notes, has to put their hands on it. They don't want to read the instruction manual. They want to jump right in and try to assemble the IKEA thing without having read it because it's the hands-on that's teaching them. I'm so much a tactile learner that I take notes about virtually everything that's important. And it's not that I have the notes. I almost never refer back to them. It's that the act of taking notes for me helps that information to sink in. So if I ever go to a training session where I'm taking tons of notes, uh, sometimes during the PowerPoint, the facilitator will say, "Oh, don't worry, I'll hand out copies of this at the end. You don't need to take notes." And that facilitator, they just aren't understanding. I do need to take the notes. It's how I'm going to learn and remember from this presentation. And then we have kinesthetic learners. Kinesthetic learners, they need to move. They like role play, they like games, they like any opportunity to get up out of their chair. My son is very much a kinesthetic learner, and I knew this from a very young age with him. Uh, we used to do something called multiplication marches because he couldn't retain multiplication tables if we just tried to sit and do it with flashcards or any of those methods. But we'd go over to the park and we'd have multiplication marches, and that's how he learned um, those tables. So hopefully you've had a chance to sort of recognize yourself within one or two of these styles. I need to give you a giant red letters, flashing lights, word of caution. Whatever your own personal learning preference is, that's likely how you are presenting or teaching. You're projecting your own preference onto other people. We all do this. But you might be missing the real transfer of knowledge because your style isn't their style. They aren't absorbing it in the way that you're presenting it. So we've got to do something a little different here. One of the biggest competencies is for any facilitator or trainer is to understand these styles and learn how to mix it up, to recognize other people's styles and include all six of these in ways that people can receive them. So if someone like me takes a lot of notes and you observe that, you can pretty well bank on the fact that tactile learning is important to them. The good news is as long as you let them take notes, they're going to take care of themselves. But if you can supplement with some hands-on activities, even better. If you see someone light up and jump in anytime you have a breakout discussion, That's probably an interactive learner. If someone's closing their eyes or staring off into space, don't assume that they've checked out. That might be an oral learner who's trying to block out other stimuli. If you see somebody who shakes their legs, stands up a lot, looks for ways to move, you might have a kinesthetic learner. And if you can find some ways to let them move, that's a good thing. Okay, now I mentioned this thing called triplication because it's exactly what Amy was talking about a moment ago. So this is also known as a stacking technique. What I'm showing you on screen is pretty standard in traditional training. The key points are presented in the slides. The trainer is speaking, and then there's a breakout for discussion. Sometimes in those breakouts, there's also an activity that satisfies kinesthetic learners if they get to build something, or there's a try it that helps the people who are tactile learners. Now, what I'm doing typically in these presentations on Bright Talk for triplication, well, I know that oral learners gravitate to this platform because it is one direction delivery. As I'm speaking, I'm meeting the basic needs of those oral learners. And then I give you slides. Those are on screen, those are for the visual learners. And I try to, with every presentation here to provide a PDF of the slides, a handout with room to take notes for the people who are tactile learners. And that's triplication. I use it throughout. It's easy in a channel like this just to use that and hit at least 3 of the different learning styles. Here on Bright Talk, it's certainly harder. We don't have the ways to do interactive and kinesthetic kinds of learning for folks. Sometimes there's an opportunity for print learners. I'll provide some breakout or some attachments that are meant to be read. So it's that sort of thing. That's how you put the pieces together. Okay, now this approach is used a lot more often in training than it is in meetings. But it really helps when meeting facilitators know and use stacking techniques like this to help people participate and learn and later on use what's been discussed. And the repetition, if you're presenting it in multiple ways, that actually helps all different types of learners too, and people who attend meetings. Uh, it keeps you from leaving certain people out as well, from missing out on their own style. So let me give you a easy way to do this in standard business meetings. Slides or handouts, that's the visual. Discussion, so it becomes more interactive. Maybe some handouts or some hands-on note-taking because you handed out something that people could use. You give them pre-work that they can read. You give them collaborative tools where they can have a shared document. Maybe that helps the tactile learners to get right in there all at once and add notes. I know it seems a little difficult, but you get the hang of this sort of thing really quickly. A little thought, some pre-planning, it becomes easier. And what I'm describing in the actual meeting or training, it doesn't take any longer than that humdrum single focus delivery where people are not getting their needs met. So I need to shift gears here. Our time is flying by. Facilitators also have to motivate people to learn. People don't come in ready to learn, not to a meeting, not to a training workshop. So we've got to make it clear to them that the training environment is a safe place, that the meeting is going to be relevant for them, that we want to make things comfortable. And there's going to be a little challenge. We want to engage people and state the personal benefit. Here's what we're going to be learning today. Here's what we're going to be covering in this meeting. What this means to you is a simple statement like that can make all the difference between how engaged people will or will not be. Strong facilitators, in addition to all that, right, they can very quickly and easily get people's attention, share what the objectives and outcomes are going to be, call out people's experience and bring people into the conversation because there's that critical reflection and their experiential learning is right there. It's in the mix. And then there's some guidance, some steering, some feedback, some assessment, both inside the workshop or meeting and beyond it for reinforcement. And what you have now isn't just, hey, we shared the knowledge, check the box, we're done. It's that we transferred the knowledge. People were able to do something with it and they were able to retain it. That matters a whole lot more. It makes the time spent in any meeting or training a lot more valuable. Now, I'm going to hit you with one more thing that's going to look like it's a lot, but you have the slides. You can come back and look at this later. Here's the biggest difference between successful delivery, where people actually learn something or retain the information, and those times when you feel like, okay, we delivered it, but nothing happened. And what we're looking at here in classic terms is the difference between pedagogy and andragogy. Pedagogy is where it is very much focused on the instructor or the facilitator's performance when they're delivering that information and interacting with others. This is like a kindergarten teacher with students in a classroom. That's how teaching has so much been thought of, that it does carry over into the workplace in ways that don't meet the needs of adult learners. And that approach, it overlooks the primary objective of the instruction process, which is to give people a chance to learn and do something different. So Malcolm Knowles, pioneer in adult education, right, he created the theory that you see on the right-hand side, andragogy, and this is taking into account what adult learners need. Taking into account that it has to be experience-based and self-directed with critical reflection. And when you are more often able to focus on the learners or the participants, when you're more often able to make it highly participatory and you're promoting that people can work independently, and as the facilitator, you're being supportive. You're not being authoritative. It's not sage on the stage. That's old school. It's that you're extracting, you're drawing out of others what they can do differently and what they can learn and how they can contribute to each other. So facilitation is really an important piece of that. I'm going to take Eugene's question here before I move into the next slide. Eugene, the PowerPoint presentation is here, and it's for you all to use. I don't post it on LinkedIn or in other public places because I frankly don't think that it does or should stand alone. I wouldn't want to just put this out there without any context or opportunity for people to ask questions. So no, I don't typically post that in other places, but I appreciate the thought. So what we're looking for is for you as a facilitator to be more effective, to be over here in the right-hand column more often. Now, two more things. I'm going to give you the qualities that make you a good facilitator, and then a quick rundown of some competencies. The qualities are up first. I try to hire for these. When I hire trainers, I look for these qualities to be in place already because it's a lot easier to train somebody on the skills, the competencies that I'll show you next, than it is to get them to change their core qualities. Right? People who are curious and come in curious, well, they can learn the skills, but people who aren't curious, are not open themselves to learning and growth, that's going to be a much more difficult premise than if they already had these qualities. So you'll notice that these qualities, they're not instructor or facilitator focused, because I don't want to feed into pedagogy, the focus being on the teacher. It's just the opposite. Effective, really good trainers and facilitators, they're not like entertainers or politicians or charismatic leaders. This doesn't fit the stereotypes of the professor or the keynote speaker who's up there on the stage and all the spotlight is on that person. A really good facilitator intentionally pushes that focus back out to the participants and to the material over and over and over again. And to do that requires these qualities, and it also requires that you know just that little bit about adult learning and about mixing it up so that you meet the needs of adults. Now, the competencies that it takes, there are 3 slides of these. These can be learned and they can be practiced. They can be acquired. It's actually pretty easy. You take a look at the ones that you don't already have. It's actually pretty easy to get these competencies when you appreciate them, because you have the qualities and you see the need for adult learning. So these are those everything we've covered so far, they're the foundations. And now we're just getting a quick glimpse at competencies. And the competencies that trainers and meeting facilitators use to make others more effective in those meetings and workshops, they have a lot to do with the setup. I set the training or the meeting up so that you could get these outcomes. I'm modeling to you this openness to learning. I myself am curious and growth minded. And I'm preparing. I'm telling you what is the desired outcome. What's your role? How are we going to interact together? How can I make this safe and productive and take your needs into account and allow for you to do some sharing? Once you get that piece of it, the next piece is that you have the session be as interactive as possible. It is sequenced. This is not a free for all. It's sequenced. You're breaking the material down in a way that people can access it and respond to it. You're moving it along at an appropriate pace based on the needs of the audience, not the needs of you, the facilitator, to cover points A through Z by 5 p.m. But you've made it clear these are the key objectives. And if we miss Q through X, that's okay because we got the main objectives covered. We made the key learning points. People are having that opportunity to take that knowledge away that's going to make them more effective. And it is a competency. It requires skill and ability to develop this. It is a skill to be responsive to the needs of every participant. You might have a room of people, and in that room of people, all 6 different learning styles are represented. But there's only one person out of that entire group who's kinesthetic, and most people there are visual learners. Well, you don't sideline the one who's kinesthetic. Instead, in the moment, you develop a facility for being able to ebb and flow and meet the needs of everyone. And last but not least, just a few more competencies to take a look at here. Good facilitators, they ask great questions that promote self discovery, that help them understand where people are and what people need. They have enough mastery of the content that they are able to credibly give that information, but much more important than being a subject matter expert, they have these facilitation skills that draw the shared knowledge out of others and create opportunities for everyone to be able to be doing some teaching and some sharing and some learning from each other. So, yes, it's polished. Yes, it's professional. Yes, it's well organized. That's usually, though, where people start and stop. They think if I give this eloquent delivery, I have done my job. And those are on the list of competencies, but I've chosen to put them last on purpose because, frankly, they're not as important as everything else we've talked about. Now, I know this was a great big skim of a whole lot of stuff, but I'd like you to continue. Take the attachments, take a look at the competencies that I've shared with you, go over to People First Leadership Academy, because over there we have companion courses like 10 Fixes for Miserable Meetings, like the one that's about asking better questions to improve any conversation. We've got the self-paced e-learning course, The Essentials of Personal Effectiveness, that will help you build up these qualities and skills too. And if all else fails, if you still have questions, not quite sure where to find something that I've teed up here, by all means, just connect with me on LinkedIn or send me an email. And let me know what you need. I'll point you in the right direction. I really appreciate all the interaction here today. For those who are listening on demand, this invitation includes you. By all means, let me know what you need. Anytime, whether you listen to this in July of 2023, like the people who are attending live, or whether it's 5 years later, let me know. I want to make sure you get what you came for. Thank you all for being here. Hope to see you next month back on Bright Talk or sometime in between on People First Leadership Academy.